split between public, private, and formal, informal cultural activities. And furthermore, the framework integrated diverse cultural domains, ranging from heritage to interactive media. And as a director of World Heritage, I can state it. Moreover, it established intangible cultural heritage as a transversal domain. Significantly, it emphasized the recognition of non-Western cultural expressions. And from a technical perspective, finally, the framework provides tools for international comparability through correspondences with global classification like, and you know all of them, ISIC, CPC, ICO, etc., and even HS, even though this requires national adaptation. All of this allows for the dual measurement of both the economic and social dimensions of culture. But however, looking ahead, the 2025 version is a necessary adaptation to contemporary transformations and the realities of the 21st century. Specifically, the 2025 framework integrates several new concepts. First, the cultural and creative ecosystem, which we call CCE. This systemic focus overcomes the traditional fragmentation prevalent among cultural industries. Second, the value generation model, moving beyond the linear productive chain. And crucially, it addresses the impact of AI and emerging technologies, recognizing the radical transformation these technologies cause in cultural creation, production, and access. And furthermore, the 2025 framework expands our perspective by integrating critical dimensions. This includes the new intersection of climate change and culture. It also strengthens cultural diversity as a vital transversal axis. And finally, it solidifies participation and access as fundamental cultural rights. Nevertheless, and despite all this progress, we now turn to the fundamental problem, the implementation gap. And despite the strengths of this conceptual framework, our fundamental problem is the contrast between the framework itself and the operational reality of its deployment. This implementation gap, unfortunately, has severe consequences. First, and you'll all agree with me, culture suffers. And culture suffers from political invisibility because, as the saying goes, what is not measured does not count. A concrete example of this is the absence of a specific sustainable development goal dedicated to culture, and we all know that. And as a direct result, cultural policies are underfunded, partly because of a lack of quantitative evidence. Moreover, effective international benchmarking is impossible, meaning we lose opportunities in the sustainable development agenda. All of this creates a vicious cycle. Without systematic data, there is no evidence of impact, which then results in insufficient investment and subsequently no capacity for measurement. Therefore, based on this deficiency, the urgent need is to institutionalize the gathering of cultural statistics. But fortunately, the 2025 framework offers the blueprint for a global system of cultural statistics. To be successful, this system must have essential components. Firstly, global conceptual harmonization based on the 2025 framework. Secondly, systematic technical training for national statistical offices. And thirdly, an expanded cultural data platform within the UNESCO Institute for Statistics that serve as the basis for regular report. And I think we all need to support this institution, and we need you to support the institution also, and we need our member states for that. Fourthly, the identification of minimum core indicators applicable to all countries, no exception. And fifthly, periodic standardized reports, could be annual, could be biannual. The resulting benefits are clear. Increased political visibility of culture in national and international agendas, evidence-based arguments for necessary cultural investment, effective monitoring of progress towards sustainable development objectives, and the identification of cultural gaps and global inequalities. This brings us to the critical moment, and I want to conclude with that. We are currently in a window of opportunity. We have the 2025 framework as the available conceptual tool, and furthermore, MONDIACULT 2025 provides the essential platform for political commitment. Moreover, we have documented evidence of the demand for this system through the Global Report on Cultural Policies. In short, we have the framework, we have the documented need, and we have the political moment. What we require now, therefore, is the institutional will. And I said it again, the institutional will to create the system of cultural statistics that global culture, and you agree, deserves. And I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite once again Mr. Sven Ostervit to give the keynote presentation. Thank you.
Yes, here I am again, and this time with the tangible, non-virtual, fresh book. We don't have many copies. I think there is one for each of the panelists, but it's available on our website since 6:30, since 1 hour. So I hope you will rush back home and read it. I can go rather quickly, I think, through this presentation. We don't want to spend too much time because we have the panel discussion that will be exciting. And also my good friend, Lazar, Director of Cultural and Heritage, helps a lot, already pointing out some of the key issues. So I think we can keep up a certain speed. So these are some, I have to move over here, and then perhaps this can be, so this is the, yeah, that's easier. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. That's good. Good, good, good. So, presentation is coming up. We have just initially UIS, for those who don't know, it's the statistical branch of UNESCO. It is in Canada since 2001. It is an official and trusted source of international comparable data on education, science, culture, and communication, covering the 5 sectors at UNESCO. It produces data to fuel the policies and investment needed to transform lives and propel the world towards its development goals. But here today, we will obviously concentrate on statistics. So what we deliver, you see the three pillars, standards and methodologies, data production, brokering, and outreach. And we, in the culture part of it, we develop methodologies and standards and data collection and dissemination. And we support national statistical capacity, provide technical support, and we support evidence-based cultural policy. And just to repeat again, now we need to implement the framework, and that is a big challenge for us, and we need your support. Now, a few going into a little bit on details on the framework. So why did we do it? Well, it is 15 years old, the outgoing one, and it needs update. There are several things, important trends in the world, emerging global and national cultural policy priorities. We need to look at the key concepts and definition and reflect the advancement in statistical measurements. And there are issues such as digitalization and artificial intelligence, which has been addressed in different fora here today, looking at cultural and natural heritage, intangible cultural heritage, and social dimension of culture. This is the timeline. It started back in October 23, and we are here now with the release. Some of the key concepts. It provides then a statistical methodology in producing cultural statistics. It refers to key survey instruments and data sources that measure the contribution of culture in the economy, provides examples of best practices, and its concepts and definitions can contribute to the development of national cultural statistical standards. There are two parts. I showed you the first part, the conceptual document that includes all the concepts, definition, and scope, and the second part, which looks at classification guide to the UNESCO framework. So the second part will be more frequent updates. There are two pillars, cultural and creative ecosystems and the value generation model that also Lazar mentioned earlier. There are actually 7 cultural domains. You see cultural, natural heritage, performing arts, visual arts, books and press, audiovisual, design and creative services, and music. And then we have 7 transversal domains. I will not go into too many details. Music is new, by the way. It is now a single domain. And we have then the value generation model, which is a very important part of it. Looks at creation and production systems, dissemination and or consumption system, and the preservation and transmission system. The changes compared to the 2009, we go very much into value generation at outcomes of the value generation and measuring the different values, the economic, social, natural, and human parts. The classification guide then is adaptation of the value generation model for each cultural domain. And it is both practical, adaptable, flexible, and quite innovative. And coming to the important part of the implementation, this is where you can see some of the benefits of a national framework. Some countries have already done it, but we certainly hope that many more will do it. And we are doing our best to try to mobilize support, resources, and partners to help you in doing that. We will produce additional methodological documents, develop a capacity building strategy, advocate for its adoption at country level, and support the adoption and implementation of the UNESCO framework at country level. This is it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Sven. Definitely efficient. We'll make everything available online on our website, so you can always go get that presentation there. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the moderator and the panelists to take the floor for the next part. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone. Benvinguts. For me, it's a pleasure to be today here because, as you know, this is my city. And as a researcher working in with cultural statistics for all my life, all my professional life, I started working with a 1996 framework. I worked later in the 2009. I was being part of the discussions in Montreal and in other places. So for me, it's really a pleasure to be today here moderating this presentation, this launch of this new framework. I have the privilege to represent here a group of very important people who have been working hard on this framework. So these people are the ones who has been assisting, advising the Institute of Cultural Statistics of UNESCO during this long process. And so it's fantastic to have them because they can give us a little bit some of the advice how to use this framework, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, because we know this is very difficult to propose a framework which allows international cooperation, that give light to policymakers in order to take right decisions, who is useful for researchers that finally are the ones who use this data in order to improve the knowledge and to give these results to the cultural community, to policymakers, and so on. And of course, in a moment that the models of productions, the models of participation in the cultural life are evolving so fast. And that's why the new framework, in a way, tries to, it's very conscious of that and tries to be updated in an easy way, even though, of course, at the same time, giving a minimum framework, minimum concepts who allows to work together. So it's in this context that I will just ask them to answer a couple of questions. And I will start with the first one, and because I want to do a dialogue, even though we don't have a lot of time, I want a little bit to ask them about how do you recommend to use this new framework, taking into account that we have to talk about different people, and also if you can highlight what are the strengths in relation to the previous one, and if you think there are still some weaknesses, I think it's also good because that means that we can still improve. So my first question is, how do you recommend to use them? And I will start by Andy Pratt from City University of London to start. And I will just give the floor to the rest. Please be short in answers.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's already been mentioned. I mean, the important thing is to translate this broad and general idea into national statistical agencies, to the encouragement of those agencies to actually begin to implement a framework for cultural statistics. That's the overall task. And it requires lots of sort of political work in that direction because obviously cultural statistics cost money to collect, and also other forms of statistics seem to be very easily attached to an economic value. I think what is really significant is that we've noticed here that actually be able to put an economic value on culture has been enormously important for politicians around the world. It frightens anybody who does any work on cultural statistics or cultural studies because they think, oh, this is the worst possible thing because it reduces everything to an economic value. But we have to work with the idea that economic values is part of the pragmatism of communicating the values, plural, of culture. and that we have the multiple dimensions of cultural value in our frame of reference, and to be able to have a robust framework to be able to commit and communicate that to national governments, I think is a massive thing. I think one of the major things that I think the latest revision has done is to help us move from the more traditional way in which most statistical collections of data around the cultural field have focused on individuals, primarily on the artist or on key outputs, and moved increasingly towards the ecosystem. And I think this issue of the cultural intermediaries, all of the people on the supply chain, all the way from creators all the way to audiences, to be included in terms of this discussion. And I think that is a massive challenge in terms of statistical data collection. But I think if we can do that, we move forward the debate in terms of the support for culture and cultural policy and reimagining cultural policy, not just supporting artists, but producing the whole cultural field in some way. So, general points.
Thank you, Andy. I want to ask Katarina Travginga from the OECD, because you are as well doing quite a lot on indicators, and the OECD is a very active partner. So how do you recommend to use this data, and what are the main advice you can give to us?
No, thank you, and congratulations really to UNESCO and to all of us. And maybe I wanted to start by saying that we probably see a big shift over the past few years in how people beyond cultural policymakers see and recognize culture. So we see culture now being on the agenda of G20, for example, a purely economic forum, or APEC, for example, as well, just a few weeks ago. So that's quite a good thing. And so there is a push also, there is a bigger demand for data on culture. And indeed, if we want to demonstrate the value of culture, we have to use the same language as people will expect us to use when speaking about other sectors. So how many jobs do you create? What is your contribution to the GDP, to exports, etc.? So it's pretty normal to use these standards also and apply them to culture. Maybe beyond this question of what brings the new framework, and it was already mentioned by colleagues, I wanted to push for better data, in fact, to feed this framework, but also to feed and to help policymakers. We need to push for better data and for more granular data. For example, on reporting employment and business statistics. We need reporting at 4-digit level, and this will really enable cross-country comparisons. And it will also enable to capture the full size of the sector, because otherwise it's underestimated, it's underreported. So we need, in labor force surveys, we need questions on second jobs, on volunteering, and this will really help. So if there is a demand for statistical offices to provide this data, this will really help. For freelancers as well, the cultural participation surveys should be more regular and more detailed as well. And another item that is very important is subnational data. So we need to put culture on the map, not just averages for countries. Culture tends to concentrate in cities. There is a lot of culture in rural areas. So let's try to go subnational with all this wonderful data as well. So maybe these were my key messages to kick off this discussion.
Thank you very much. And you just say this thing about the rural areas, and that I propose now to Francis Vakabuta, Secretariat of the Pacific Community, because she's coming from not a rural area, because it's a sea area, because the Pacific is really thousands of islands. So what is your advice from your point of view?
Thank you. I think very briefly, in terms of the benefits and the transformation that the framework has gone through in its current iteration, is its flexibility and its more holistic approach. So for us in the Pacific, when we're looking at it through a Pacific lens, it certainly aligns more closely than previously. with our own aspirations in terms of data. We have at the Pacific community where I'm based something called the Pacific Data Hub. So for those of you who are interested in Pacific data, you'll find all things Pacific at the Pacific Data Hub. But something that we're particularly interested in is the nexus between. So if you're whether you're talking health or education or any other sector, that cross-sectoral data as well. The gap, of course, which we're very excited about the new framework, being cultural stats and data itself. So while there are opportunities, there are certainly challenges. One of the biggest challenges, I think, would be, or gap, would be the capacity to deliver on this in relation to, how do you say, specialist culture-related professions. So if you're talking statistics, we're going to get your classical statistician who's going to be trained to work in the bureau, you know, to operate the census, for example, as opposed to thinking specifically about the area of culture and the culture and creative sectors. So that's going to be a big shift in thinking. And something that I think is also requiring a lot of attention, which hasn't quite gotten the traction it requires at the global level, but certainly a lot of discussion at the regional level, is around indigenous and traditional knowledge systems. The fact that WIPO still hasn't been able to come to some consensus about the protection and safeguarding of indigenous traditional knowledge. So we're starting to look more closely at what is required in relation to data sovereignty, which of course will have direct implications for what we can collect, how it's stored, where it can be stored, who has access, and of course the processes and protocols. But having said that, I think that the 2025 framework certainly opens the door for these conversations, which just 5 years ago we weren't having. So I think that itself is a huge milestone, and so congratulations and thank you for that gift.
Thank you, Francis. And now going from the Pacific to the Gulf area. So Elena Rajewski, sorry for the pronunciation. What is your advice?
Thank you very much. So I will build on already so many details shared by dear colleagues. What is striking in this framework for me, and when we get some conversations around the concept of cultural and creative ecosystem, is that if you look even at the report, you will see that all the core charts, all the visualizations have circular shape and highlight interconnectiveness among the elements of the system. It would mean that if before we'd consider A and B, now it will be A, B, and link between A, B, which is C, which for us would create incredible opportunity for new indicator building. So very important when we speak about value generation, which is one of the core concepts of this framework, how we generate value. Do we speak about economic value? And here the framework is very helpful because it enhances further the data collection on contribution of culture in GDP, expenditures, trades, etc. But when we speak about other kind of values that culture brings, how do we create those indicators that would allow us to assess those dimensions that are considered in common practice, most of the cases, as intangible and difficult to measure? So for us, the added value of this framework is that it would allow to combine classical statistical indicator in culture that existed and are further enhanced, and this new dimension that would allow us to build indicators to better capture valuation mechanisms. And when we speak about valuation mechanisms, it also includes and practices, because it's very clearly stated in the beginning, in the introductory part, that the unit of measurement is practice. So practice would have many processes that extend. Practice is something that extended over the time, right? Practice is something that we learn. Practice is something that we transmit, right? So how we include all these dimensions in overall measurement of performance of our culture sector. And then second question, how we would create compatibilities among those measurements that adapted to local, regional context, and then we create comparative frameworks that would create a coherent vision of how culture sector and culture policies perform worldwide in different parts of the world. So I believe that's my response. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think just taking your words as for starting a new question, because sometimes policymakers want simple indicators, aggregate indicators. And researchers, we want more micro approach, because we want to demonstrate our hypothesis, want to try to see. And there is always a clash between both visions. And this framework have to be useful for both. For policymakers, of course, have to be useful as well for researchers, because we need that knowledge just spread and grow. And in a way, this idea of value generation, how this is able to be used by both stakeholders, and at the same time, in which way, because of course, that data comes from the countries, so it's data providers, we have to work, and it has been presented the idea that training is one of the important pillars in order to be able to improve the quality of this data. But we, at the same time, we need analysts, and we need that the users, the different end users of this data, could use in the best way as possible. So how we build something that it's really giving light to these different interests, which are complementary, but at the same time are sometimes in tension.
I think one of the really sort of valuable elements that we've just been talking about really is this dimension, the transversal dimension. It's the linkages between things. And often we don't have, as you just mentioned, we don't have measures for those. But at least making visible the importance of these interconnections is, I think, one of the things that this new iteration of the framework helps with. But I think one of the things that we've also mentioned about is the challenge of how we work with the existing data that we have. There is a lot of data in national agencies that is there, which is inaccessible. It's inaccessible in a variety of ways in which it could be used for cultural statistics. It might be, as mentioned earlier on, in terms of not having detailed enough breakdown to the 4 or 5 or 4-digit level or even 5-digit level, be able to identify activities. Sometimes the breakdown at those levels is only done at the national level, but it's not done at the sub-national level. So all of these possibilities of unlocking regional data and also the details of the culture and creative system relies upon a different sort of transversality, the transversality within governments, between departments, between the culture department and the national statistical department, etc. And there are often communication lacks between these different areas, and needs are not always expressed and communicated in this way. So I think there is a set of issues that need capacity building in terms of the skilled statisticians, those people working with cultural statistics that really understand what data needs to be extracted. So there's, on one hand, there's this transversal at the level of making visible culture and all the new interconnectivity, etc. But then there is the other level of actually unlocking the data that is already there, which requires a huge investment as well.
Thank you. Katarina, do you want to continue this? I was thinking as well about how this will be used by artificial intelligence. That is, you will use or will recreate. So probably there is now the capacity to use the data in a way that probably 5 or 10 years before was not possible. So I don't know if you want to incorporate this or not, but please feel free.
Yeah, I maybe wanted to stay a little bit and say a bit more on how we can improve the measurement of the economic value still of culture, and say a few words about culture's contribution to innovation. So we all in this room, of course, believe that, well, culture and creative sectors are innovative and that they spur innovation across the economy, they provide new ideas to all the other sectors, etc. But do we have data on this? Not so much, and only for a couple of countries, really. So there is a lot of progress to make there, especially as many countries now are talking about competitiveness and innovation-driven growth, etc. So that's another big area where we need to progress, and that's something that the OECD is doing now in this this year and next year. We're trying to use the traditional ways of measuring innovation in other sectors like copyright, patents, business expenditure on R&D, on research and development, government expenditure on R&D, community innovation surveys, trying to apply this and see what we can find in terms of creative industries innovation there. And then we'll also try to explain that, in fact, innovation happens maybe differently in these sectors, and maybe these traditional matrices of measuring innovation are not so much adapted to the creative sectors. And once again, this can explain the underestimation of innovation in creative sectors. And then what we'll try to do as well is to provide new ways of measuring innovation that hopefully will be more adapted to help with the measuring innovation in these sectors, and again demonstrate its a bigger economic value.
Franz, do you want to react to this? Very short, because we are a little bit out of time.
Okay, thank you. I think that we really do need to invest in more research. We need to engage in more research on statistics itself. A lot of the time when we talk about cultural statistics, our emphasis on research tends to focus on culture, but we do need to invest in the more technical. So I think that we haven't yet really begun to unpack what we mean by cultural literacy and data literacy, and what that means when you bring a wide range of stakeholders together, whether we are actually singing from the same choir book or whether we have very different understandings of what it is, the intention and the how and the what for. I also wanted to acknowledge that for us, a lot of the activities in the cultural economy, the cultural and creative sector, operates in the gray economy, so it's untraceable, but it's critical to sustainable livelihoods and economic empowerment. So learning to unpack and harness effective ways and means of measuring for the benefit of not just the national economy, but also for communities themselves and individuals. I think that will be the real test of the proof and value of cultural statistics in Pacific context in particular.
Thank you. Elena, do you want to close this first part of the debate?
Francis, I agree with you, and for me, it's very important to have more training in the domain of culture statistics, because the competences that this domain would need are intersectorial, and they combine statistical knowledge, the knowledge of specific, as Katya mentioned, specificities of the culture sector that come from innovation and some many other aspects, and when it comes to artificial intelligence as well. So there are not enough programs that would combine the specific module of knowledge to create a cohesive narrative. What does it mean? Culture statistics. And in broader term, here we speak about silos that would exist between academic research and other research that would exist to reveal the impact of the culture sector. So here again, the framework for the culture statistic has ecosystemic approach, right? So this same approach should be applied to the field of culture statistics as such. We need to enhance further the ecosystem that would combine statisticians, specialists of culture domain, practitioners, people who work on artificial intelligence, copyright, etc. So I believe we need to advocate for such approaches to create new generation of the people who would advocate this particular branch of knowledge that becomes increasingly vital with the enhancement of artificial intelligence and so many other tensions that we are witnessing today. So that's my point.
Thank you very much. And now is your round, the audience. So I don't know if there is anyone who wants to ask a question or to an appointment, but please, you have to be maximum 1 minute. Okay, maximum 1 minute. And there is a question here. Introduce yourself and 1 minute maximum.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation, for the discussion. My name is Pierluigi Petrillo, and I'm full professor of comparative cultural heritage law at the University of Rome and UNESCO chair holder on ICH and comparative law. So we started 2 years ago our research, international research, trying to evaluate the economical impact of UNESCO inscription of several elements in the ICH list. And it is very difficult to find data on ICH. So my question is about this. The new UNESCO framework for cultural statistics give any advice on how to collect data on ICH in the ICH fields? There is any proposal, any indication from you? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if it's Jose, you have to answer yourself, or because it's. You can use my one.
Hello. Yes, absolutely true what you said. I mean, there's still, I think, obviously some areas where there still needs further investigation and research. And so although we elaborate a little bit more on the ICH component, which is the cultural knowledge domain in there, we're not yet at the stage where we're prescribing or able to prescribe a specific technique or any type of specific approach. But I think, as was mentioned in the director's presentation, we will be building upon the FCS by investigating several areas, and that's certainly one area. So we want to go a little bit more in depth and elaborate as a complement to the framework, this type of thing. So over the next several years, we'll be addressing that. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, Liesje Proveiller from Aruba, small island in the Caribbean. I'm a researcher at the Department of Culture, Policy Department there, and I had a question related to the sustainability and accessibility of the data. Do you have any recommendations as to how to gather longitudinal research data on cultural statistics and where to store them and make them accessible as well for the field?
I don't know if Francis wants to answer, because I think the sustainability issue is something which you are very, very sensitive.
I'll take a shot. So the approach that we've taken in the Pacific, because we are comprised of many small island states, has been one of regionalism. So we have several regional organizations with different mandates. The Pacific Community, where I work, is mandated with scientific and technical development support and advice, and it hosts the only Culture for Development program. So we have, as I mentioned, the Pacific Data Hub, and so it's member-led and driven. So our mandate comes from our members, from the member countries, right? So we will hold the data that is collected on and with the members, with tiered access to ensure that we're, I guess, safeguarding their data sovereignty. But with their permission, there are certain levels and layers of data and information that is made available and public over long periods of time. So basically, we call ourselves an institutional custodian on behalf of our members. And so what we've found, if I can just very briefly just say what we found, is that by using that language, you also reframe your identity as an organization, your intention, your values, and your purpose, and it also reframes the work that you do. I don't know if that helps, but happy to have a conversation afterwards.
Will be the last. One question there.
Back there.
So
Good exercise for the end of the day.
Thank you.
very
Hi,
quick, please.
Yes, I'm Cristina Cotănescu from the Ministry of Culture in Romania. Romania worked to implement Culture 2030 indicators, and in the light of the new UNESCO framework, I was wondering if there are any plans for the future to update the Culture 2030 indicators framework, or to build new indicators for the future culture post-2030 dedicated goal.
I don't know, Jose, do you want to answer, or maybe?
Yes,
the direct-
I can answer. So on your, well, indicators is very big, right? So there's going to be, I think in the future, quite a few different types of indicator systems. So I think for the Culture 2030, although I'm not managing the program, I think that now that we have the new 2025, we would need to align, right, where it's needed to the concepts. So there may be some indicators now that are affected. I think cultural and natural heritage, for example, it's a little bit different definition now in the new framework. So the Culture 2030 would then adapt. But that's a decision that they'll need to make, whether they adapt it or they just, because there'll be maybe a slight break in the time series if you change some. But again, we haven't assessed yet what the impact will be on that system. Of course, I think we already heard earlier about the whole concept of a goal 9. So however this manifests itself eventually with member states in developing, so whatever arrives, I'm sure there'll be a monitoring and indicator component as we see it today in the SDGs. So yes, this would require then, of course, global monitoring and global data to be collected. I think it's early discussion, so I'm not aware of anything concrete. I think the process is still just beginning. Thank you. Last question, maybe?
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. My name is Ken Munimapana. I'm the CEO of the National Arts Council of Tanzania. So I have a practical question. In Tanzania, if the country organizes a cultural festival, whereby people from all over the Tanzania who come to the festival, they rent hotels and stuff. But the revenues that are generated based on that festival are counted for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism, and not from the Ministry of Culture. So I don't know how about this conference, for example. We are here for culture. We brought a lot of money here. So where are these statistics, revenue statistics are counted for? The Ministry of Culture or somewhere else? And based on the framework, and what are the indicators that? So I hope I'm clear.
I think any of them can answer this because it's part of the transversality of the data. So who wants to answer?
I think it's a continuing challenge. I think part of the issue is of nation states beginning to realize that this broader conception of culture involves all of the domains rather than just the cherry-picked domains. And of course, there has to be an alignment in some way between the recognition of those domains as active areas, of practice areas, and the administrative responsibilities. And of course, as I was mentioning before, there is often a challenge between internal competition between ministries for particular sets of activities. And I think this broader conception of the cultural sector, rather than seeing it as separate components, but actually interrelated, and that it is intersupportive as well, is a message that would help, hopefully, eventually help governments to see that they need to really see these things as an integrated area of activity rather than as separate ones, which would, in the long term, remove those sorts of problems. But it's a real problem.
Just I wanted to add what this issue would exist not only in the area of competition among different ministers. It would even, if you create statistics on businesses, small medium enterprise, you would take restaurants. They will not be in the scope of culture statistics as such, but if you compare two of them, one of them would use traditional knowledge and would use traditional materials and so many things that would relate to local culture. Now, does this restaurant belong to culture ecosystem of the city? Yes. Does it support local economy in that sense, local culture, creative economy? Yes. But now, what kind of tool would you use to survey and create also the support when you're a regulator of a culture sector? So those entities need to be in your scope in one way or another. But it's very difficult to discern this cultural composite. That's something that we would face on a quite regular basis in Abu Dhabi. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want just to thank our panelists and give the floor to the director again, because we have to close and we are really on time. But thank you very much for your part.
So, Just very, very few words, and first of all, thank to all of you for having attended this exciting meeting, and thanks a lot to all the panelists for having enriched and pointed out a whole series of key challenges that we need to find solutions to collectively, but certainly within UNESCO and UIS. There are several challenges. We need to improve the data. We need to look at and try to find solutions to some of the big challenges, how to better measure what is extremely difficult to measure. We need to make sure that we can provide assistance to as many of you as needed, and we have very limited resources, so we need to see how we can work better together with all of you. There was even questions on post-2030, which has started, and you all know we would love to have an SDG on culture, and that I think would help us also to consolidate more interest and support around it. But that's in the future. If all of you support it, we may be able to go in that direction. Thanks a lot to all of you for having me here, and looking forward to working together with you all. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
so I did. Now I'm embarrassed, but just a little bit.